Hello everybody, I'm back with another video for you today. I haven't done a card reveal video for quite a while, so there's a whole lot to catch up on, including 2 new evolving cards, one for monsters and one for Northern Realms. I won't watch the trailers for those. If you're interested in them, then you can go and find them on the Gwent YouTube channel. But yeah, I feel like I've seen enough at this point, and you guys have as well, and I've already watched them in my own time, so just want to give my thoughts and impressions on all the cards that have been revealed up to this point, including quite a few potentially very nutty and powerful cards. So first up we have Auberon King. This is the Monsters Evolving card. He is Wild Hunt synergistic. So you've already seen that we're getting Frosts and Wild Hunt units back, and you've probably seen some of these other card reveals at this point as well. So a lot of synergy with that and with Dominance and all that stuff. So his effect is spawn and play random bronze Wild Hunt unit, which then upgrades to Create, giving you 3 options, a bit more kind of, ability to choose and find the best option there. And then when he's in his final form, whenever you play a Wild Hunt unit, you boost that unit by 1. So immediately coming down at effectively 7 points plus a Wild Hunt unit. This seems pretty playable, and we'll see, because there's quite a lot of new new Wild Hunt units. It's because I was thinking Naglfar, but whatever. Which are going to kind of dilute the create pool. Some of them will be good options for the Auberon to pick, and others will be maybe not so good, and there's some interesting things to think about there. So once we talk about each of these, I think this ability will become a bit clearer and how much value you're going to get from it. But right now it seems like a decent play. One of the big things to think about is you can activate thriving units twice, because you play 2 units. First a 6 strength and then a Wild Hunt unit, which could have quite a bit of strength potentially, so has a bit of synergy there with Thrive, and for that reason I can definitely see this card being playable as some kind of, either in a Devotion deck or not. And there's some other cards here which work well with Thrive, which we'll talk about as well. But yeah, will it be sort of a Wild Hunt only archetype and used in that? It's very hard to say. I think probably there's not a huge incentive to play a Wild Hunt only deck compared to doing other things, but then again there's definitely some powerful cards, and there's even some here that we'll get to talking about that could make this an archetype you want to pursue. But my impression is you might play this with the Devotion effect, but it probably won't ever be played in a full-on Wild Hunt archetype. I think you don't want to miss out on some of the really powerful monster cards by playing a Wild Hunt or Frost only deck. But anyway, seems like a playable evolve card, and seems like a pretty decent one, some pretty good value and some situational value there as well. Okay, let's jump into the next card. Wild Hunt Bruiser, a Wild Hunt unit, 5 strength, 1 armor and 5 provisions. Deploy, move an enemy unit to the other row. If target moves to a row affected by frost, damage it by 2. This card definitely seems pretty playable. You can kind of compare it to something like Dragoon. You don't have the flexibility to move your own unit, but you do have potentially an extra 2 points if you're playing Frost, which you very well might be, because there are a couple of good Frost cards like the Eredin and maybe the Red Riders card. So yeah, this card looks very, very playable, maybe even very strong. I definitely see this fitting in just monster decks in general that want a bit of movement, because that's something that can be quite hard to fit in if you're not running Drowners. This card might be a nice alternative to Drowner in certain decks, and just, yeah, good in general, especially if you're running Frost. So this is definitely going to be a key card, and it's a good pull for the Auberon, so that's making the pool of cards a little bit better. Next we have Aen Elle Conqueror, which is another Wild Hunt unit, 7 strength, 4 provisions, Veil, deploy, destroy self, devotion, cancel the deploy ability. So basically only playable if you're going to be devotion focused deck, but if you are able to play this as a 7 for 4 with Veil, that is really, really powerful, honestly. This card is like, I already talked about it with the Tursak Invader, which also has Veil and is 7 for 4 effectively in round 3. Or is it 6 for 4? No, it's 7 for 4. But yeah, that is potentially a very strong thing to use in later rounds when you're vying for value in round 3 and trying to deny the opponent's sequencing and bleeding plays, poisoning plays. That Veil can be really nasty, and on a 7.4 provision card, that's pretty good, honestly. Big thing here is the 7 points is going to allow you to thrive very nicely. 7 is a really good thrive number, and to have it at 4 provisions, that's just really premium for certain decks. Like, Gernakora is going to be very happy to try to fit this card in and try to play a devotion style, I think. And I definitely want to be trying this card. Worth noting, you could use this with Portal, in theory, but not really worth doing because, yeah, there's just too many other 4Ps that you'd like to run. It's going to be way too inconsistent for that to be working very well. Worth noting, this is another Wild Hunt unit, so that means the Auberon, if you aren't running Devotion with Auberon, you have a chance that one of your create options is going to be a dead card that you can't actually use with him. So that's something to keep in mind, that this is good for the Auberon pool if you're playing Devotion, and very bad for it if you're not. This card is very interesting, and I'll be looking to try it and see if Devotion Monsters works. Next we have Naglfar's Crew, which is a 1 for 5, deploy, spawn Frost for 2 turns on an enemy row. At the end of your turn, if there is Frost on the opposite row, boost self by 1. So, essentially coming down as a 6 for 5, which is very, very vulnerable to removal at 2 strength. And it's also not really thriving anything because it is 1 strength. So, instant impressions of this card are, it's just not very good, looks a bit weak. In theory, if you have some other Frost synergies in your deck, like Eredin or something, then you can get a bit more value. You can maybe get a 7 for 5 or 8 for 5 from this, but I just don't see this card being super great in most monster decks, if any. It's just a bit too conditional and not really getting its value most of the time. And it doesn't activate Thrives, which that's something you usually want to do in monsters because you have a card like Lava, which is so powerful, and you want to try to get the most out of that. So don't really see this card being very playable, to be honest. Is another pull from Auberon. It's not a bad pull from Auberon, to be honest, so that's something to keep in mind. You can get a nice little 6 for 5, maybe develop 2 kind of engines in the same turn and get some value there, but I don't think you'll be playing this naturally in your monster deck. I think it's a bit too weak, unless you want to go all in on the Wild Hunt archetype, which is something you might consider, but I'm not sure that would be too viable of an option. Next up, we have another Wild Hunt unit, Naglfar's Taskmaster. So again, another option for the Auberon, and another good option. Purify an enemy unit is its ability, and if you have dominance, you can purify your own unit as well if you choose to. Or not as well, but as an alternative to the enemy. So working kind of like the Sapper in Scoia'tael, but the reverse, you know, a condition for you to use it on your own guys, which kind of makes sense for monsters. They usually want to purify their own units probably, since they're going to be getting poisoned and things like that. But the Purifying Enemy is also pretty decent for dealing with defenders, so this card is probably quite playable and definitely could see play again as a one-of in decks, or you're just going to steal it from the Auberon pool. But yeah, monsters often likes Purify, and sometimes they're even playing Caretaker, Queen of the Night, things like that. Maybe even, I've seen Pella in some monster decks. If you're going to be running Pella, you may as well just run this. So this is definitely a good tool for monsters to have, and this card will probably see some play. And again, it's a pretty decent pull from Auberon. There's definitely going to be situations where you want that Purify value. So, not a bad card there. Next we have Ard Gaeth, which is the Monster's Echo special card. And it is 10 provisions, and it spawns Frost on both enemy rows for 3 turns. And then of course it shuffles back into your deck for next round, where you can play it again for another potentially 12 points. So in theory, I've been calculating the Echo value last night actually, and in theory the effective value of this card is probably about 17 points for 10 provisions, assuming you play it twice, and assuming that the Frost, you get all the value from the Frost. So in the absolute best case scenario for this card, it's probably worth about 17 for 10, which is very, very good, of course. Problem is, it's going to be very rare, I think, that you get the best case with this card. I think most of the time it's going to be a lot worse than that. It's probably, I don't know, you might get the 12 value once, but I don't think you're getting 12 value again. Probably on the second play you're going to get more like, I mean, even, yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict, maybe 6 or 8 value. So I don't see this card being really OP at all. In theory, it could be worth a huge amount of points, but I think it would be a bit too clunky to use. But definitely might still be playable. yeah, it can. I think it's still probably going to be worth about 12 for 10 on average, something like that. So if you have Frost Synergy in your deck, if you play Eredin, if you play maybe some other things, some Wild Hunt Bruisers and those kind of cards, then this card might be good. I think the one problem is you need to play it twice to get the value. Otherwise it's going to be really difficult to justify putting this in your deck, I think. And playing this twice, playing it consistently, is probably going to be hard. So I would say this card's not looking super viable, but it's also not looking super unviable. It could go either way. I think it won't be a particularly great card, but it could be played if you're really looking for the Frost and the Eredin and things like that. It's kind of a very fair card, I think, is the way to look at that. But yeah, pretty decent option for monsters. Next we have the Northern Realms evolving card, which is Viraxas. So again, same stat line as all the evolving cards, unfortunately. Order effect of reset an allied Northern Realms unit's order ability, and of course transforming into giving it Zeal as well as resetting that order ability. And in his final form, he actually has formation here as well, which is important to note. So yeah, here he has Veil, formation, and also whenever you play a soldier, boost it by 1. So yeah, again, another one of these cards working like the others. Formation means he actually can be worth a little bit more. You can immediately get the value from his ability, or you can play him on the back row for potentially an extra point. It's an interesting ability. It's probably the most kind of clunky and difficult to get value from of all the evolving card abilities, just because you're required to have an order unit with a pretty good order effect alive and on the board, you know, to get the value there. So what are we thinking? Well, possibly Prince Anses after he's been boosted up quite a bit. If they have a couple of tall units, you can reset that to deal a lot of damage. Maybe Bloody Baron if there's multiple, you know, high strength units, boosted units. Otherwise, I think it's going to be very difficult to get the value from this card as things currently stand in Gwent. It might be the case that there are new order effects, you know, that we haven't seen yet for Northern Realms, which are really, really powerful. Not sure I would count on it though. I think most likely it's looking like this card would be a bit difficult to justify. The one place I see it maybe working is either if you're using it for that soldier synergy, you're playing a lot of soldiers and you really like boosting them, Visigoth value, and potentially then you're also running Baron and things, and you can eke out a little bit of value from this ability as well as getting the soldier boosts. And you don't mind playing a devotion deck. That's the one place I see it working, or I maybe see it working in some kind of Redea list. But then again, like, provisions are very tight, and I don't know if you can justify playing this just because it can work with a boosted up Anses from a Redea. I think that's going to be a little bit clunky, but it could maybe see some play if you don't mind doing devotion and don't mind playing a lot of soldiers and wanting to boost them, because that can be very valuable, having another sort of Reynard effect in Northern Realms. But yeah, it doesn't look too promising. Probably the weakest, I would say, of the evolving cards shown so far, although it's definitely still not unplayable, I don't think. Just requires a very niche sort of setup to make it work. Okay, next up we have Kerack City Guard. Now, this card is very interesting. I've heard people say different things about it, but it's a 3 strength for 5 provisions, Veil, order effect of move an enemy unit to the other row, so a bit of movement. At the end of your turn, if order is not used, boost self by 1. So coming down as actually a 4-point card and growing by 1 every turn as long as you don't use that order effect. So a way you can look at this card is it's just like having an engine, like a Magni Division or something like that, that doesn't actually have a condition, other than not using the ability, but that's not really a condition. Your opponent can't force you to use the ability, so yeah, the way I see this card is it's just a card that just boosts by 1 every turn, and potentially can get you a bit of hidden extra value if the opponent has a movable target. So I think it's not a terrible card. It's not anything too crazy to write home about, but definitely in a deck where you have a lot of long-term value cards, a lot of engines, where the opponent's maybe already using a lot of their removal, then this card might very well be decent. It's also got a bit of boost synergy with the Sidemen and Uprising and things. You don't need to you know, it boosts itself to get those cards' value. So this card could definitely be played in an engine overload style of deck, I think, and it wouldn't be too bad. And the movement for Northern Realms is kind of a rare thing as well, so yeah, I don't know. I don't think this card is terrible, but I don't know if it will be super common. You could probably play this in Redea decks. You could probably, yeah, maybe fit this in engine overload decks, and that's probably going to be about it on that. Okay, next we have Egmund. A 4 for 7 with 1 armor. Copy-paste of the other 4 for 7s that we've already seen. He does have Veil like they do, Zeal, Order, Melee, as they all do as well. Damage an enemy unit by 3 at the end of your turn. If Order is not used, boost a unit to the right by 1. Now, interestingly, I think Egmund has the best Order effect, you know, give or take, probably the best of the 4 for 7s we've been shown so far. And also the boosting a unit to the right ability is very good in Northern Realms, because you're thinking value with Tridems, with just boosting your guys for Scytheman and Uprising and, you know, Visigoth value. So this card definitely seems decent and probably playable. There's a lot of good options in Northern Realms in terms of doing the same function, like Anna and Reynard, but you may very well consider this as an alternative to those, or maybe not even as an alternative, but as an extra, you know, engine. And that 3 damage can come in really handy, you know. 3 damage is kind of a premium and quite hard to come by, and to get just 7 for 7 every time with this seems pretty good. Pretty hard card to shut down. The most efficient way to deal with it is probably going to be just damaging it, because if you move, it actually still gets boosted every turn. So you're going to need 5 damage, and even then it's getting 6 for 7 value. Not even that terrible, and maybe it's more than that if the boost that he does on his first kind of boost, you know, gives you some extra value. So I think this card's definitely playable. We'll see if it's auto-include worthy. Not sure about that, but it definitely seems very, very good. And this is a very interesting card, guys. We've got Amphibious Assault. This is a warfare card for Northern Realms. It's their Echo card, 12 provisions, so the most expensive that we've seen so far. Play a Northern Realms unit from your deck with provision cost 9 or less. Boost it by 1 for each provision below the limit. So, a crazy card, and let me make one thing clear. I think this card is a little bit bonkers, actually. I think it's very, very powerful. Just looking at it, I think all the Echo cards will actually be very, very good. That mechanic in general, if you're able to play an Echo card twice, you're just getting free provisions effectively in your deck. You're getting stronger cards. So I've seen this card compared to not Cleaver's Muscle, the card that spawns that, Novigradian Justice, playing a sort of dwarf from your deck, a lower provision card alongside getting your 5 extra points. That's how you can look at this card, but it also has Echo, and you're boosting the engine or the low provision card that you play. So this card to me seems really strong, especially considering it's a warfare card. With Natalis you can tutor it, so you know it's probably quite easy to get this very reliably, play it twice very reliably, which I think is what is going to make an Echo card particularly strong, if you can reliably play it twice in the game and get all of that value from it. And yeah, if you're able to play, there's so many units that work well with this, you know, any kind of lower provision card that could require boosts, any of the Orders effect units really, or inspired units. Kedweni Knight coming out of the deck for huge value. I believe that's coming out at 12 points. So just this on Kedweni Knight alone as an option is a 12-point card, and then, oh, another 12-point card, and you're paying 12 provisions for that, so this is basically worth, effectively it's worth about 17 for 12. Probably a bit more, or maybe a bit less actually. But that's a really huge amount of points for the, you know, for the just provision cost. Usually you're getting about 12 for 12 and you're reasonably happy. Think Philippa, she's like 11 for 12, obviously damage is an upside, but she's also conditional, so getting 17 for 12 is kind of ridiculous, and it's 1 thinning value because you thin your deck down by 1, even though there's Echo, you know, which puts a card into your deck, you do thin another one when you play it a second time, so this card is really, really good, I think, and there's a lot of options. It makes a lot of different ideas work a bit better, like the Blue Striped Scouts on Commandos, more consistent. You know, any kind of engine, Temerian Drummer, Anna Strenger, stuff like that is just going to pop off with this card potentially. And yeah, in general, the Kedweni Knight is also looking like a star here potentially, getting you far more value than is reasonable really from one card. So we'll see, but I think this card, I don't see this card not seeing play. This is definitely going to be a strong contender in Northern Realms, and I imagine this... Honestly, this card might be so strong as to be auto-include. I would go so far as to say that. I imagine once the dust settles, this will be something you see in most, if not all, Northern Realms decks. I do think it is that strong after kind of crunching the numbers on it a little bit. It is very expensive, but what it does for a deck is just... It's just really, really good. Really, really good. Alright. Next, we have a couple more Northern Realms reveals. Here we've got Kerack Cutthroat, a 4 provision card, nothing too exciting, 3 strength, formation, order, give an enemy unit bleeding 3. This seems like a really good card, honestly, just a 7 for 4 most of the time, or trading with removal, which is a decent trade. It's nothing to write home about, but, you know, if you're getting the bleeding effect off and you're getting a 7 for 4, that's just... I mean, what more do you want? You already play Mauler and you already play Radovid Royal Guard, which are 6 for 4s. This is just kind of one of those, but extra points. So this will definitely see play, probably in most Northern Realms decks, I would imagine. The power creep is getting there, it seems like, a little bit. And we have another sort of very, very good 4 provision card for Northern Realms that, yeah, should be played in most, if not every deck for Northern Realms, I would imagine. And we have Smoke Them Out, which is spawn 2 volunteers in allied row and boost them by 1. So volunteers are these cards, so you get 2 of these, boosted by 1, 6 points for 5. This is a warfare card, and the volunteers are soldiers, so there's a bit of synergy there with certain things, you know, all the boost synergies and the swarming and the uprising and things like that are gonna maybe like this card. It is a bit kind of understated, 6 for 5 is not... It's not too great these days, so I would be surprised if this card were played. I mean, it does have some pretty nice kind of synergy with the sidemen and things, like short round, play this, you still get your uprising value. It's considerable, but I'm not sure it will be played. Maybe as a 1-of or even a 2-of, you just kind of throw them around, get a lot of Visigoth value. Not saying it's impossible, but also not saying it's super likely. Could be a decent one to throw in if you're playing a lot of warfare anyway, or you need another target for Natalis and this is just making sense, but I wouldn't be surprised if this card doesn't see a huge amount of play. But yeah, that's all the reveals I've got for you today, guys. Some really interesting cards, and yeah, Northern Realms with the Amphibious Assault. I'm kind of feeling like that might be very, very powerful when the expansion comes out, but only time will tell. And they did seem to get one of the weaker evolving cards, although, again, that might not be the case. Anyway, let me know what you think, if my impressions are valid, if you agree, disagree, and yeah, let me know how excited you are for the expansion at this point. Anyhow, thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.